Good evening, everyone. My name is Jamie Buren. I'm the interim CEO of Bend the Arc Jewish Action, and I want to welcome you to this call. Before we begin, I'm going to share some opening thoughts and introduce you to our speakers. I want to also let you know that there's an option to view automated captions if you click live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen and then click show subtitles. Thank you for being here tonight together in Jewish community in the aftermath of another horrific act of white nationalist terror. It can be hard to find the right words at moments like these. We're heartbroken, we're outraged, we're tired, and we're determined. On Saturday, the Black community of Buffalo was targeted by a white nationalist gunman who acted on the ideology and rhetoric of dangerous conspiracy theories of those who believe this country is only for themselves. We have seen this before too many times. Our tradition teaches us that each life is a whole world. To save a life is to save the whole world. And to take a life is to lose an entire world. After Saturday, we began to learn more about the 10 worlds that were violently taken from this one. Pearl Young ran a food pantry every Saturday for 25 years. She loved to dance. Andre McNeil was at Tops Supermarket to purchase a birthday cake for his 3-year-old son. Roberta Drury was visiting Buffalo to be with her older brother, who was recovering from an operation. Hayward Patterson was at Tops to provide rides home for people without cars. He loved quartet singing. Ruth Whitfield was on her way home from visiting her husband in a nursing home. Celestine Cheney had 6 grandchildren. She was shopping with her sister to get ingredients to make her favorite dessert, strawberry shortcake. Aaron Salter tried to prevent the shooting as the Tops Supermarket security guard. In his spare time, he restored a 1967 Cadillac, which he planned to give to his son. Geraldine Talley had spent the day at the Buffalo waterfront with her fiance. She had just learned that she was going to become a grandmother. Margus Morrison was buying food for a weekly Saturday night movie night with his family. His children and stepchildren considered him their best friend. Catherine Massey wrote a frequent column for a Buffalo newspaper run by Black women. Her last column called for safer gun regulations. We remember them, each an entire lost world. We remember them in resistance to an act of violence that seeks to dehumanize and destroy, to limit and exclude. All of our worlds are diminished by the taking of their worlds. And we're here tonight as a multiracial Jewish community in solidarity for the dreams of multiracial democracy, of Black liberation, and of freedom and safety for all. There are hundreds of us on this call tonight from all corners of the country. And I want you to feel the power of being here together, ready to grieve and learn and act. We're here tonight because we can't defeat what we don't understand. We're fortunate to be joined here by teachers and organizers to help us understand what's happening right now in this country and what we can do about it. We're going to first hear a reflection from April Rosenblum, a writer and organizer who studies race, class, Jewish identity, and movement building in the 20th century. Then Ben Lorber and Gina Green are going to share a briefing on the Great Replacement conspiracy theory and respond to this threat and solidarity. Ben is a writer and organizer who researches white nationalism and anti-Semitism at Political Research Associates, a social movement think tank and strategy center. Gina is a strategist and writer and is a consultant at Uprise. She sits on the boards of Bend the Arc, PRA, and the Jews of Color Initiative, among other progressive movement organizations. And before we close our program with actions we can each take right now, we're going to say the Mourners Kaddish together, led by Joshua Friedman, who is a longtime organizer and leader of Bend the Arc's Pittsburgh chapter. With that, I want to thank you again for being here tonight, and I'm going to pass it to April.
Hi, everybody. We come together in a space of mourning tonight. We're feeling many emotions. Maybe you're feeling grief for the Black community in Buffalo and for all the communities now that are facing heightened political violence. Maybe you're feeling fear about how anti-Semitism is animating these attackers. Maybe you're feeling anger and frustration about all the different kinds of daily violence that Black people go through and how only certain kinds of violence seem to rise to the attention of the non-Black public. If you're feeling an emotion I haven't named, let's just pause long enough to take a breath or two and notice what you are feeling tonight. And as we come back together, I want to talk about another part of why this event in Buffalo hurts. We know that Black and Jewish are not two separate terms. We are overlapping communities. But this event hurts even for those of us who don't share both of these identities. And it's because Black and Jewish communities have meant something to each other in this country. I'm not talking about a little window of interaction in the 60s. We have meant something to each other for a long time. More than 100 years ago, when Black communities in the US and Jewish communities in Russia were both suffering repeated violent attacks, Black American communities organized support for Jewish victims of mob violence in Russia. And Jewish immigrants who arrived here and saw the violence being unleashed against Black communities understood that Black people were suffering pogroms. We have been seeing each other for a long time. We recognize something in each other because for centuries, all over the world, our communities have survived because we built cultures of resistance. Our survival has been anchored in cultures that offered us something different than the oppressive systems around us. And in America, our communities got just a little time to interact before the forces of racial capitalism, of privilege offered to white people on the condition that Black people remain subjugated, started working to tear us apart from each other. And for those of us who are Black and Jewish, maybe there are moments that can feel like being torn apart from within. Our peoples have been present at the creation of white supremacy. We have known that it has to end. Black Jews and Black non-Jews have known that consistently. But many of us who are non-Black Jews have spent much of the last century hoping that we could survive white supremacy. Could we compromise? Could we figure out a way around it? Could we get by within it? We're in a moment now when that illusion that some of us can achieve a good life while others of us are denied that is being torn down. With the rise of the right, those of us who are not Black are facing the answer to our question. White supremacy is going to keep knocking on our door until we dismantle it completely. And so Jews are at a turning point. More and more of us are coming to understand that the compromise in America that worked for some of us was not actually stable ground for Jewish well-being. That our future depends on building a multiracial democracy in the United States. And we don't know what that's going to look like because we've never had one. It's not going to look like going back to the pre-Trump years. As scary as this moment is, there are ways that we are in a powerful position. First, because throughout these decades, when most Jews in America felt like the system was good enough for them, there was an inconquerable separation between Black communities and most Jews, even though many non-Black Jews did care and wished it were different. Our communities have meant something to each other. On a deep level, all of us want to know what it feels like for these other people that we care about to really have our back. And now, because conditions around us have become more clear, we are going to get to figure out how to do that. As scary as this is, we are fortunate to be alive in this moment and have this opportunity. Second, because there are parts of the progressive Jewish community that have meaningful Black leadership now, and that is a key to getting us where we need to go. Because Black organizers have expertise in how to resist white supremacy in America. And those of us who aren't Black are going to contribute a lot too. All of us as Jews bring a culture of resistance, and some of us bring many cultures of resistance. We have so much going for us right now as a community. Third, because Jews in Bend the Arc and our partner organizations are well positioned to reach out to many other Jews in America and provide strength to other Jews and lead them. And many other Jews in America right now are listening and are ready to hear how we move forward. So on that note, I want to thank Gray Hagans, whose ideas shaped a lot of what I just shared. And I'm going to pass it to Ben and Gina, who are going to get into what happened and how we do move forward.
Thanks, April. So my name is Ben. I use he, him, and I'm a researcher at Political Research Associates, a think tank that monitors right-wing movements and works with social movements to fight for a just multiracial democracy. So what we know is that this Buffalo shooter was a white nationalist who was motivated by what's called the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. And so I'm going to talk a bit about the ideology that motivated him and how it shows our interconnectedness and how we can fight back together. So the Great Replacement conspiracy theory emerged among French far-right movements and then spread throughout white nationalist movements in Europe and the USA, right? And this makes sense because white nationalism and the rise in authoritarianism that we're seeing in the US is a global movement, right? So the Great Replacement conspiracy theory essentially says that the quote unquote white race in the US and Europe is being replaced by Black and brown folks, especially immigrants, and that Jews are in charge of this great replacement, orchestrating it from behind the scenes. In the US, white nationalists think that immigration and demographic change, which is leading our country to become a majority minority country in the next few decades, is a Jewish conspiracy to destroy the white race, and that Black liberation movements, LGBTQ rights struggles, changes in gender norms are also part of this conspiracy theory to attack white people. And I'm not sure where white people got the idea that becoming a minority in this country means they're going to be persecuted. Who knows where that might have come from in their mentality. But the point is, the Great Replacement conspiracy theory is an old idea. It did emerge in the 70s, but it's also been around for much, much longer. Ideas that white folks are being replaced or erased have long and deep histories in white supremacy in the US and around the world. So the shooter wasn't mentally ill, right? This is a way that folks, try to depoliticize what he did. He was enacting political violence in pursuit of a very specific agenda. And he wasn't acting alone. He wasn't the lone wolf either, which is what we hear sometimes. He's part of a movement of white nationalists who have committed other attacks motivated by the Great Replacement conspiracy. Attacks against Black folks in Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. Attacks against Jewish folks at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018, and a Chabad synagogue near San Diego in 2019, and a synagogue in Halle, Germany in 2019. Attacks against Muslim folks at Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand in 2019, against Latinx folks at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas in 2019, and more. As Jews, we know we have a stake in fighting white nationalism because we see that there's a connection between their anti-Semitic ideology and their anti-Blackness and their Islamophobia and their anti-immigrant xenophobia and their anti-LGBTQ bigotry. The Jewish community, as Jews, we're not the target here, right? But at the same time, the shooter was motivated by anti-Semitism, a conspiracy theory about Jewish power and control was a linchpin of his entire ideology. In his manifesto, he said, quote, "The real war I'm advocating for is the Gentiles versus the Jews." And even more disturbingly, in his manifesto, he said he asked himself why he doesn't attack Jews right now. And he says, quote, "They can be dealt with in time." So I bet you want to take a deep breath. So the last thing I'll say is that the shooter was radicalized on 4chan, but there's nothing fringe about his views. He had the entire conservative movement behind him. The GOP is now the party of white nationalism and the Great Replacement conspiracy. Fox News host Tucker Carlson has cited the core tenets of Great Replacement in over 400 episodes, according to a recent Washington Post survey. And he's the most watched show on cable TV with millions of viewers. GOP elected officials have endorsed Great Replacement, conspiracy theory, and they'll say it in slightly different terms than the white nationalist shooter said it. They will say that, that Democrats or liberals are bringing in immigrants to replace voters, right? But those are all dog whistles, right? The theory is the same. GOP elected officials spoke at a white nationalist conference earlier this year. Calls for a total immigration moratorium are now commonplace on the right in a way they weren't just a few years ago. Anti-Semitic George Soros conspiracies are now mainstream, right? Fox News and the GOP will say that George Soros is bringing in immigrants. George Soros is funding Black Lives Matter, right? That's the anti-Semitism in slightly coded form. This was all happening during the Trump years, but it's accelerating now in our post-Trump era. Great Replacement conspiracies are motivating the conservative base. It's the common sense of the MAGA movement. A new poll recently released shows that half of Republicans and 1/3 of Americans believes some form of this Great Replacement theory. And what's going on is that in the face of growing and vibrant movements for Black liberation, for LGBTQ rights and more, as climate change is creating more and more climate refugees, politicians and pundits are stoking white grievance in order to manufacture division and fear. Across the country, we're seeing an authoritarian coalition that's continuing to seize and to consolidate power. And it's committed to replacing our system of multiracial democracy, however imperfectly it exists right now, with one of a patriarchal white Christian minority rule. They're rolling back voting rights, rolling back abortion rights, attacking Black and brown and LGBTQ folks, and they're spreading anti-Semitism. And this latest white nationalist shooting is part of this growing wave of intolerance and authoritarianism in our country. And to fight back as Jews, we need to see our stake in building intersectional coalition movements on many, many fronts to defeat white nationalism and to protect our multiracial democracy. And with that, I'll pass it to Gina Green.
Thank you, Ben, for that primer on this Great Replacement conspiracy theory that, as you just mentioned, has began on the fringes and on the margins 40 years ago and is no longer there. It is certainly part of our mainstream now, and certainly part of the mainstream of the movements and the opposition that we're trying to defeat. One question that I actually want to ask you before I talk a little bit about some of Ben the Ark's work is, one of the things that I've seen percolating over the last 6 days among particularly white Jews in our community is, I think, a particular feeling of isolation and fear, and almost like a competitiveness around who is at most risk and who is in the most danger. And I'm curious what you may think about what it might mean for those of us who are not Black in the Jewish community, seeing this news and holding, we are at risk, and yet we weren't at risk last Shabbat. when those Black folks in Buffalo were murdered. So I'm curious if you have thoughts on how our communities can resist the temptation to be divided in this moment, and what's at stake for us if we can't.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Gina. Well, I would say that, first, of course, I would say that there is an element of like, it's appropriate, I think, for white Jews and white folks to, to realize that that we weren't, the main targets here, and to center Black voices, both Black Jewish voices and Black non-Jewish voices, and to really show up for our friends and comrades right now. At the same time, I want to validate the aspect of that fear that's rooted in the knowledge that that anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness are deeply connected in the ideology of this white nationalist shooter and across our broader society. Like anti-Semitism, as I was saying, like helped motivate his attack, and it's helped motivate anti-Black rhetoric, on the right for years now, right? Like during the movement for Black Lives, the George Floyd uprising in summer 2020, right? GOP leaders spread the conspiracy over and over again that George Soros was funding or was orchestrating those protests, right? So as Jews, we know that anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness are deeply connected. And so I think resisting attempts to be divided, resisting that competitiveness that would set different communities against each other, and to really ground ourselves in the knowledge that we need to stay connected, that we need to build a coalition between all of our different communities, honoring the many identities that are within the Jewish community as well, knowing that we literally can't end anti-Semitism without also ending anti-Blackness, and that we can't end anti-Blackness without also ending anti-Semitism, and knowing that we really are fighting for each other, and at the same time we're fighting for ourselves, and that's the kind of intersectional coalition that we're going to need to keep each other safe and to to defeat authoritarianism in our country.
Thank you, Ben. I was actually supposed to talk a little bit about the work that Ben the Ark has done over these last several years around fighting white nationalism and white supremacy. And this will be a little bit of a surprise to my Ben the Ark staffers, but I'm having trouble actually talking about the work that we did, and I'd rather talk about the people that we did it with and the people that we did it for. Thinking about over the years, all of the moments in time where Ben the Ark staff and organizations and leaders in the field and across the country and in Washington have come together. And we know some of these moments, like we remember these moments. We remember the shooting at the mosque in Christchurch. And at that point in time, we were able to organize our friends and our people to say, this is not acceptable. White nationalism anywhere is a threat to all of us everywhere. We certainly remember the shooting at Tree of Life, when we had organizers and folks on the ground who had worked so deeply and so closely with Black and Brown and Muslim allies in Pittsburgh, and were able to come together to honor those lives of those folks who were lost. We organized and rallied when Asian women were targets of shootings in Atlanta, saying that we are in this fight together. And it has been, whether it has been the Latino community in Texas, or the Asian community in Georgia, or the Muslim community in so many parts of the world and the country, I've been so proud to be a part of Ben the Ark's work for the last few years to fight white nationalism and white supremacy, and really lead us toward Black liberation in the future, because we know actually that in this country, the liberation of Black folks will be the liberation of us all. So with that, I'm actually going to open up the floor for some Q&A from other folks who might be in the audience and have some questions for you and me, Ben. And here we go. They're in the chat for me to ask. Let's see what we got. I'm reading the questions and reviewing and making some executive decisions here.
Great, great.
All right, okay, here we go. Why is the mainstream press not talking about the extreme anti-Semitism underlying the Great Replacement conspiracy theory? Ben, I know you monitor lots of things, so you probably have some thoughts on that.
I mean, I suppose I don't necessarily see that trend. I've been heartened in seeing a lot of mainstream coverage that does name the anti-Semitism that motivates this Great Replacement conspiracy theory. I've actually been kind of heartened that that many mainstream sources are able to draw these connections. And I also would say that, aside from mainstream sources, I think we still, have some work to do, broadly speaking, in educating, our fellow progressives about what anti-Semitism is and how it animates, many other forms of repression, including the visceral, like, anti-Blackness that was, like, on display, over the weekend. And so I want to
Ben, hold
honor.
on 1 second. I have a
Yeah.
question that speaks exactly to that, which is a point of clarification around, are you stating that anti-Semitism drives racism? That was an explicit question from the audience. So can we talk about how anti-Semitism undergirds racism, and a little bit more specifically on that piece? I want you to keep going on that point that you were just making before you went to the next one.
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say, I think it's, when we talk about, anti-Semitism, we're talking about an ideology that's very complex and has evolved a lot, like, over time. Like, I do think, like, 150 years ago, at the dawn of, race science and race thinking in Europe, anti-Semitism and racism were very, deeply connected in the way that, like, that Jews were racialized in Europe, and still, are racialized in the white nationalist imagination, even as many Jews are also white. So I would say that, there are similarities and there are differences. I would say that, that anti-Blackness, in the US and around the world has its own distinct history that intersects and overlaps in many ways with anti-Semitism, and there are ways that are distinct, but what I would say now is that when the GOP is, riling up people to oppose Black Lives Matter in the streets because it's Soros funded, or to oppose what they think is critical race theory because they think a cabal of cultural Marxists in the media is engineering a critical race theory, that's when we can, like, really see clearly that anti-Semitism and racism are operating together. Like, this conspiracy that an elite, cabal up at the top of society is orchestrating, like, Black brilliance, Black freedom movements. That's where we see very clearly that anti-Semitism and racism are working together, and that's deeply anti-Black, also, obviously, because it robs, it says the Black folks aren't leading their own movements, and that there's, like, some cabal of Jews, behind the scenes who are leading it. So I think right now they're definitely, feeding upon each other and undergirding each other in really profound ways. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. I know that we're recording this so that folks can share it out. And I want to thank you for lending your wisdom and your expertise to this. Oh, here we go. We got another question that I think I like.
Okay.
Here we go. I do want you to answer this one. Ben, can you say more about the French European origins of the Great Replacement conspiracy theory and sort of the global nature of this hate movement, and also speak to the intersection with the anti-LGBTQ movement? And that will be our last question.
Yeah, so, you know, basically the brief history is that, that in the decades after the Holocaust, explicit anti-Semitism fell out of favor, right? But around the 1970s and 1980s in France and elsewhere, in Europe, you had new far right wing voices who essentially said that, that immigration from the third world, Black, brown, and eventually Muslim immigration would destroy the European character of Europe. And those ideas like traveled through to white nationalist movements in the US. And beginning in the 1990s and later, white nationalists in the US were kind of looking for new frameworks to root their anti-Semitism, and so that they settled upon this idea that non-white immigration was going to be some mortal threat to the white race. And we live in a time when there is, when immigration, which is, a beautiful thing, right? Everyone should have the right to immigrate if they want to. Everyone should be home. Everyone should be given home. Everyone should be safe and protected. As immigration has increased, we're seeing more and more white nationalists who are using anti-Semitism and using xenophobia, to manufacture division and fear in this way. At the same time, like white nationalists and other far right groups are obsessed with protecting what they see as traditional like patriarchal gender roles, cis heteropatriarchal gender roles, I would say, and they're increasingly angry also with the growth of the Christian right, like we're seeing a massive backlash in this country against the gains of feminist and women's liberation movements, the gains of LGBTQ movements for equality and visibility and acceptance. And we're seeing increasing conspiracy theories across many different parts of the far right that George Soros is behind increasing movements for LGBTQ acceptance, or that cultural Marxists or liberal elites, right? These are all very many dog whistles, right? But essentially, like anti-Semitism comes in with a kind of like large explanation that the Jews are behind it all. It allows these racist and Christian right figures to paint a totalizing picture of who's behind it, and so that's why like we're very concerned that as the Christian right and Christian nationalist movements attempt to roll back abortion rights, attempt to roll back the marriage equality, they will use anti-Semitism to mobilize people and to manufacture division and fear. And we have to, as Jews, like we have a stake for that reason and for many other good reasons to support movements for equality and liberation and justice in this country.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to pass the mic, the proverbial mic, to Joshua Friedman, my friend from Pittsburgh, one of our leaders who have been the ARC Moral Minions in Pittsburgh. Joshua.
Thanks, Gina. Again, we remember Celestine Cheney, Roberta Drury, Andre McNeil, Catherine Massey, Margus D. Morrison, Hayward Patterson, Aaron W. Salter, Geraldine Talley, Ruth Whitfield, and Pearl Young. Please join me in saying the Mourner's Kaddish. Yiskadal v'yiskadash Shemei Rabbah, v'yamal v'yamla v'yalma tivrach chirusei, v'yamlich malchusei, v'chayechon uv'mechon v'chayei dechol beis Yisrael, v'agala uv'zman kariv v'yimru, Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mivorach le'olam, u'me'al maya. Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yispar v'yisramam v'yisnaseh. V'yisadar v'yisalal v'yisalal Shemei Dukudashah B'richu. La'ela mikol birchasa v'shirasa tushbachasa v'nechamasa damiran v'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlema rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'yol kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'ramav uyaseh shalom aleinu v'yol kol Yisrael v'yol kol yoshvei tevel v'imru. Amen. And with that, we pass it back to Jamie.
Thank you so much, April, Ben, Gina, and Joshua, for this powerful and really informative and important session tonight. I know that there were a lot of questions that folks had, and we're going to be continuing to do this work moving forward. So please look out in your email tomorrow for a follow-up with some next steps. And in the meantime, I want to share some closing thoughts with all of you. I know that since Saturday, I've been feeling a deep mix of rage and despair, along with a motivation to act. This horrific racist shooting comes alongside so many other injustices that are disproportionately impacting the Black community, like the fight for abortion rights and reproductive freedom, an unprecedented nationwide formula shortage, and reaching the once unfathomable milestone of 1 million COVID deaths. We again hold in our hearts the Black folks who were murdered on Saturday, as well as their loved ones. They were killed in a place that was supposed to be safe, a space to go for sustenance, a supermarket that their community organized to get, that was the only supermarket in their part of town. We know that we have so much work to do to combat white supremacy and white nationalism. And we hope others on this call are also feeling called to act. So for tonight, we want to recommend making a donation to one or more of the following organizations who are working to support the community on the ground in Buffalo. Our direct fundraising asks are rooted in our understanding of systemic white supremacy that is experienced by the community and the impact of the current closure of the Tops supermarket. The organizations are Black Love Resists in the Rust, a Black-led organization that's focused on developing BIPOC leaders locally and running campaigns on budgets and redefining public safety. Voice Buffalo, which is a faith-based community organizing project connected to Live Free, which is formerly a part of FIA and PICO. African Heritage Food Cooperative, which is a member-owned food cooperative focused on sustained access and Black ownership. Open Buffalo, a racial, economic, and ecological justice civic organization focused on leadership development and advocacy and organizing. And finally, Every Bottom Covered, which is the only diaper bank in Western New York. If you're not involved with a local Bend the Arc chapter yet, please reach out to get involved or see our map. You can find us at www.bendthearc.us/act-locally. I want to thank you all again for taking time to join us tonight. And I hope you all continue to come back and get involved with us and in this fight. And I hope that you have a peaceful rest of your night. Thank you all so much.